thank you for joining us here at Square One's Lunch and Learn series. I'm your host, Trisha Ari, Senior Director of Operations. Today, we have founder and principal of Gable Technology and the host of Agile Embedded Podcast, Jeff Gable. He comes to us as an experienced technical leader and embedded software guru with an expertise in medical device software standards and regulations. Now, I'd like to turn this over to my friend, Jeff Gable.
Welcome, everyone. Talk a little bit about myself. I'll talk about some of the issues that we have in software development for medical devices, especially from a manager's and executive's perspective. We software engineers love to get deep into our craft and write really clean code and very maintainable code. And often there are a lot of difficulties in interfacing with non-software engineers, be they technical or non-technical. And so we'll talk about some of the common issues that come up and ways to mitigate them. And some common anti-patterns that I've seen, especially with software risk analysis and conflating prototype and production work. That's a really common problem that I've seen. Again, I'll talk about ways to fix that. And then I'll try to sell you on using modern tools to track your software requirements and your software test cases and stop tracking them in Word and Excel. And at the end, it wouldn't be a presentation if we didn't talk about AI. So I'll talk about how the state of AI in software development, how it can be used, the good things, the bad things. And again, I'm sure you're going to have lots of questions there. A bit about myself. I'm an embedded software consultant. I've been a solo consultant for about 7 years, and I focus exclusively on the medical device industry. And I've led a lot of software development efforts. I also co-host the Agile Embedded Podcast, which is about how to apply Agile embedded software, Agile software techniques specifically to embedded software development. That is software that is running on devices as opposed to cloud apps, mobile apps, that kind of thing. Okay, so one of the most common problems I see in software projects, especially when we're talking about software that's on a device, integrating with a device, is that software can look complete long before it's actually complete. The common pattern I see is that when teams are estimating their completion of the software effort, they'll rapidly get to 90% and the executive team is really pleased and it looks like everything is going well. And then it just stays at 90% forever. And you keep asking your software team, hey, when are you guys going to be done? Say, oh, we're 90% done. We discovered some new things that we forgot about, but we're 90% of the way there. And that last 10% can take 50% of the project timeline, if not more. And there are no solutions there are solutions to this, but there are no silver bullets. And some of the solutions I want to talk about is, first of all, this is often due to not really defining requirements well at the beginning. When you start a design-controlled development effort, there needs to be a really focused effort at the beginning to think through requirements in detail. A lot of people think that Agile means you don't have to define any requirements up front. And I'm here to tell you that's not the case. You definitely want to make a mock-up of your graphical user interface with every single screen, not just saying, oh, we'll get to that and that can be defined later. That's where surprises lie that will really mess up the timeline later on. So really going through requirements in detail in the beginning and pushing as far as you can go. If you don't have enough information yet, that's fine, but it's really important to disambiguate between you don't have enough information to define this yet, and you're just kind of being lazy and want to put it off. Another thing to be very clear of is the definition of done. So software engineers are famous for saying, oh, that feature is done. Well, is it tested? Is it documented? Has it been integrated into the final product and tested in the context of the final product? And is all the documentation updated to reflect it? So if those aren't the case, then that feature is not done and should not be marked as done in the TED line. And if you want to, add different percentages for those different activities that form your definition of done, fine. So that they can maybe track a percentage that leads up to 100% on that feature. But it's when someone says something is done, you need to query them, or there needs to be a very clear expectation up front what done means. Another thing that an anti-pattern I've seen in software projects is that uh, software development is often excluded from the risk analysis. I think most people in medical device development are pretty comfortable with 14971 and the risk analysis and hazard analysis and mitigation process. I have seen that very much neglected on the software side. And I will often see people write in, code review is the mitigation for software risks. If software makes a mistake and there's some dangerous output that could harm a patient, they'll say, oh, well, we do code reviews, and that's the mitigation for that risk that will lower the probability of occurrence and therefore make it acceptable. And that's pretty bad practice. I would say most software risks, it is quite common for them to be able to be mitigated in hardware. So for instance, if your software, again, is capable of going off the rails and producing an output that harms a patient, you can put in hardware limits that could actually prevent that from getting to the patient. And I'm speaking in generalities here because the medical device development is vast, and there are lots of different types of devices and lots of different ways they can harm the patient or the user or something else. But if you have a software risk that is most appropriate to be mitigated in hardware or in system design, you need to know that early so that you can make the hardware changes. Those are things where if you realize that at the end of a project, it's too late to change the hardware. The hardware has been set in stone for months. And so again, having your requirements, thinking through those in detail, and then getting that software architecture in place early and identifying the risks and doing that software risk analysis early can feed back into requirements for hardware, which is the sooner you know that, the better. All right. Another common anti-pattern I see is conflating prototype and production software work. This is goes back to my point earlier about it's very easy for software to look done without being done. And especially when you throw together a quick prototype, it often gives you the impression that the software effort is complete. And so the way I like to look at it is prototype software is software that has not been done under a design control process. And it can even happen during a design control development process. You're integrating with some new service or some new component, and you basically write some quick throwaway code to test that out and make sure it works the way you think it does. That is just like a 3D printed part. It's useful. It gives you feedback. It is not a production part. You basically need to throw it away and start over. And you can certainly pull in, copy paste in certain lines from the prototype code that you spent a while figuring out. You can use it as inspiration, but it is not production level code. That is tested and documented and written in a way that will satisfy all of the different edge cases and mitigate all the software risks, something we talked about before. Prototype code typically just tests the happy path when everything works well. And your actual device error handling in production software can be 60% of the code base is handling when things go wrong and what to do about that, how to warn the user or the operator. And so I think that's just a really useful analogy to keep in mind is prototype code is like a 3D printed part. You throw it away, you do it from scratch the correct way. All right, switching gears a little bit, I want to talk about the power of modern tools. And what I mean by this is particularly an application lifecycle management tool, or you might hear software application lifecycle management tools. So ALM, SLM, SLAM, that kind of thing. This is a tool that will track your requirements and do all of the traceability for you. You still have to put in the work to define the requirements and to link the hierarchy of product requirements and software requirements, and maybe if you're decomposing it more than that, you still have to do the work to link them, but then the trace matrix is just done for you. And the same thing on the verification side. You write your unit test protocols and your verification protocols, and you link them to the requirements that they will verify. And then if anything changes, and that's, I'm not the host of the Agile Embedded podcast for nothing. I very much like operating in an agile way. I like being able to respond quickly to new requirements as they come up during the development process. But you need to be able to not have a whole lot of extra work and extra friction to update a trace matrix when you go and start adding requirements or making changes. And that's when you're managing requirements in Word or Excel. All of the tracing needs to be done manually. It's error prone, it's slow. Lifecycle management tools cost a little bit of money, not that much, compared to the amount of time you will pay your engineers to manually do the tracing. In addition, I think the medical device industry is getting better about this, but in the past there was a great resistance to using open source tools, especially say on the code verification side. So static analyzers, unit test frameworks that can run unit tests automatically in a pipeline that's running on the cloud, that can verify your software automatically. There are paid versions of those, but there are also lots of free ones that are just as good. And there's traditionally been a resistance in the medical device industry to using open source tools because they were not verified themselves. They were not built to medical device quality. And so people would then not use any tools at all. And to me, that's a big mistake. Using modern quality verification tools that are open source are absolutely far better than the alternative of not using them at all. And so I would encourage you to keep an open mind. I know that the FDA has put out guidances in the recent history that have toned down the requirements for verification and validation of tools. And so I think it's much less rigid than it used to be. Moving on to just talking about Agile in general, I think Agile nowadays has become such an overloaded buzzword, and the Agile consulting business has grown and metastasized and kind of corrupted the core principles that started the Agile movement 30 years ago. But to me, Agile means learning as quickly as possible, getting feedback as quickly as possible, and being able to react and incorporate those learnings, which show up as changing requirements, being able to react to those and incorporate those into your development process as smoothly as possible. And so that's where using quality tools that reduce the friction of updating your requirements and checking that the code changes you've made to react to those changing requirements haven't broken something else. That's where a lot of those tools like static analyzers and unit test frameworks can give you that confidence that the changes you're making aren't causing regressions. All right, and last I want to touch on AI. So I actually just got back from the Embedded Summit. It was a conference up in the Bay Area last week, where a bunch of embedded systems engineers gathered and talked about updates to our industry. AI was definitely a hot topic. There were several good panels on it. And I do use it in my work. I would say I am still on the adoption curve where I use it, but not as much as I could. And I will say that it is great for certain tasks as long as you are an experienced engineer who is keeping a close eye on it. It does not replace software engineers. And while it is possible, you're going to hear about vibe coding and non-engineers being able to create apps very quickly. And that is very true and very powerful, especially for getting that early feedback. That is solidly in the prototyping realm. the result of that process is not appropriate to use in a production medical device. But then for those of us who are experienced software engineers, we can use it to speed up our work, but we can never use it to replace our brains and our experience. And that's a trap I've seen people fall into. And I think everyone who uses it eventually learns that lesson. I learned it very quickly when I was the first time I used it, a buddy of mine was kind of walking through it, and we were trying to develop a desktop application to talk to my embedded device. I'm not a desktop application developer. I'm unfamiliar with those frameworks, and so I used Claude Code, which is a very common AI tool, to get something up and running very quickly. And I was able to talk to my device, and I was really impressed. And then I looked at the code, and I didn't understand any of what it was doing. And I tried to add a couple of features and it failed, and I had no way to get it back in sync under my control where I actually could make progress. So you very quickly, when you're working with these tools, hit a wall, especially if you give them too much rope. But if you give them small tasks, a bit at a time, always checking the output and making sure you understand what it's doing, I think it can allow you to make progress more quickly. And I would be okay using it in production code, again, with the caveat that it's basically doing the typing for me. I understand the architecture. I understand the specifics of, say, the code module that I want it to write. And I review everything very, very carefully, make sure it's tested, read through it and understand it. And when you don't do that is when you can get into trouble.